topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
It's Arthi with Light Up Your Life, and we're already in April. Always, we start these conversations. Where is time going? And I know many of you have probably felt the sense of being a little bit off. And I've had this conversation with so many people in the last couple of weeks. For those of you who noticed that time change. And I know this is a running record, but we are creatures of the world. So when things are happening in our world, it affects each and every one of us, whether you watch the news or not. Naturally, human connection, especially when there is a war that is occurring wherever it is, becomes so deeply impactful on so many different layers. Then, of course, if we know anyone involved, or we, know anyone involved, or hear stories, or even turn on the media, then it even doubly changes things. So, just want to recognize that sometimes you may not know why you're feeling off, and sometimes it's really hard to explain. Then we have our own stuff too, right? So we have our global self. We can call it our global self, the one that kind of takes on things from the world. And then we also have that personal self. What is happening in our own settings? To be honest with you, I don't really know anyone who's not suffering from some type of work-life balance stress right now. I think the issue that's coming up for a lot of people is a little bit of heightened anxiety that no one's really talking about, because some people have either gone back to work, and more so physically at a greater level, or some people are still doing a lot of work from home, and they're missing that connectivity piece, or it's been full-fledged ahead, going hundreds miles an hour, interacting socially. And so one of the things that I'm looking at and I'm going to be starting back up for the webinars. We just had one. If you want to look up, we just started our YouTube channel, and one of them is just on expressive journaling, and it is done with one of our volunteers and myself. And our next one, actually, I'm going to highlight for the month of April. I believe it'll be the last month of April, and you can watch it at any point. But that one will highlight the fact of when everyone seems to be okay and I'm not okay. And I'll give you a personal example. So overall, I have nothing to complain about, right? My family's healthy. I'm healthy, have gained that COVID weight, but just overall healthy, which is one of the areas we look at. Relatively everything is going pretty well. But the thing is, there is a lot of anxiety that is still created with daily tasks. How do we find balance? How am I finding balance of taking care of myself while doing my program, while working, while making sure that my kids are okay, my husband's okay, and then of course just making sure that my sphere of my friends and family are doing okay, and that I'm reaching out, which I realized has been a poor connection point for me. And so that brings up some anxiety. And then I'm thinking about the fact of, am I giving the best care possible? Because I'm really not taking the best care of myself in terms of like giving myself a little bit of breathing room. So what I'm trying to get at is we're all kind of navigating this area a little bit. And that's something I want us to recognize, is that there is some anxiety. And we've talked about this previously. Some anxiety is normal. It actually, we have a part of our brain that is feeds off of that anxiety to help us to drive to do things. It becomes abnormal when it consumes us, when it doesn't allow us to do things, right? But we do have to recognize that anxiety comes in situations, especially when our environment is shifting and when things are happening and when it's different. So, for example, we enter these new phases in the last couple of years, right? We were under lockdown. Then we were going to just our immediate surroundings of the grocery store, maybe, or some people weren't even doing that. Then we were slowly coming back, and then were having places where the restrictions were up. So then it's just like that grief and loss cycle, ups and down, ups and downs, ups and downs with waves. Same with the anxiety cycles that will come up and down, up and down. So I just want us all to recognize just that idea of just being really humble with the fact that it's okay not to be okay. I think that's the lesson we have to start understanding. It's okay not to be okay. How do we start sitting with that for a little bit and then trying to figure out how to navigate that? And I have to tell you all, I did one solo video months ago. I was kind of scrolling on my own feed yesterday, just checking on things to see how many episodes had been done, and I may have to do another pre-record. And the one that I had done about mindfulness, just in that moment, taking a breath, taking 2 seconds to ourselves to just be like, okay, let me just sit with this, and it's okay. I accept myself with non-judgment, with self-compassion, with with love, right? And even if those words are hard for us to acknowledge, giving ourselves some little area to start exploring. Because the fact is, as much as we think everybody's judging us, the biggest critic, we call it that inner critic, is us. So how do we start working on unleashing and unfolding it? Is that we start to not give it so much permission and hold, and that comes through mindfulness. It really does. And I have deeply fallen in love with this this transformational piece of things that can happen. And I am by no means right now a half an hour practitioner. I just take minutes in my day and just put them in there when I can and insert. Sometimes 2 minutes. Sometimes it's me just even holding on to something for a few minutes. Sometimes it's just like when I quickly am grabbing a bite to eat, I will like literally enjoy that bite to eat. Um, so that kind of thing is really, really critical. And so that's what I want to highlight to you is that fact. Um, and so I think the more that we resonate with the fact of giving ourselves some permission to do this, and a lot of my work right now with my clients um, is helping to do that, is to navigate that piece, is to make it our own practice and give it its space. And it doesn't have to be these extensive periods of time. But please check out that episode because it really does highlight how powerful it is. And I could talk about it forever because like I said, I've fallen in love with it so much. And I think we need to really, I was on a conversation with someone yesterday with the Mind Up curriculum, which is designed by Goldie Hawn's Foundation. And I just love her story about wanting to make impactful work for children. And the fact is, we need to start talking about this and getting it moving in different settings. The stress rate is way too high to not address how to take care of ourselves. So I'm excited. In May, I should have my certified workplace um, mindfulness facilitator certification, and I really want to help start bringing it into places that we just like our healthcare setting, our education setting that needs those few moments to, as first responders, or those different settings that just needs a little bit of a reset in those quiet, so just quietness for just moments. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up. So today we were supposed to have Allyson Roberts as our special guest. As you can see, is our is our banner for today. Unfortunately, Allison came down with not feeling well, and so today's kind of like a solo show on this fly. And I want to say that we just embrace what's supposed to be. And so I wish her to feel better, and hopefully we can get her back on for one of our episodes, because she is definitely a powerhouse of that truly transformational work with the human mind, and what we can kind of navigate and do with. So I actually wanted to shift a little bit um, for today's topic. It's always all related to the human mind, as you know. Um, so I know a lot of people uh, have really examined Brené Brown's work. Um, and I just, if you ever listen to her story, or if you ever read about, how she just has taken this work to make sure that her work is really expansive, and that everybody has access to it, so we can start doing some healing. That's what makes her so inspirational to me, is the fact that she is introducing concepts that we may have known, but making it so that it comes and becomes a little bit more raw, and helps us to think, helps us to do things that we don't want to be doing. I had a client earlier tell me that they just, when it gets too hard, they just want to stop doing, it was about in context of therapy, when we just want to give up on approaching some of those really difficult pieces. And she was just saying, I wish I didn't feel this way. And I just told her, I want you to acknowledge the fact is, some of our traumas and some of our sensitivities get lodged so deeply in our body and our mind, that sometimes the anxiety comes in, that we don't know how to, we're afraid of feeling better too, because we don't know how it's going to look, and it's so used to being feeling a certain way. And so that is a vulnerable place to be. And I think just acknowledging vulnerability, like, period, in any shape and form. And I've been talking a lot about, when we seek out help, like, it's not mental health help, it is called support. And the example I've been using most recently with my clients is, like, when you are feeling a heart murmur or heart tension, and you talk to your primary care physician, or your PCP, and they maybe do a referral to talk to a cardiologist, a heart doctor. You don't you don't check twice and talk about, you don't always use the word help, right? I'm just getting it checked out. Same when it comes to mental health. Why can't we approach the idea that I'm getting things checked out? I don't feel right. Something doesn't feel right in my brain. It feels heavy. I feel like we need to really address this stigma and really take care of that piece of it. Because if we are talking about our brain, right? Our biggest beautiful organ that is managing even our heart, right? It's managing our breathing. It is managing our emotions. It's managing all of the different life sources and the vital forces. So I say it's not about getting help, but it's about getting support for your brain. And if that can help anyone who's listening in, to just say, it is okay. I'm gonna accept the fact that I just want to check in with my brain and see what's happening. Please know, like, oftentimes the hardest thing is giving ourselves permission. But once we enter a zone, that it can literally change things. So why I bring up Brené Brown is because, as you know, we've talked a little bit about her previously, but her work with empathy and her work with vulnerability is so powerful. And we we will, in a few moments, take a few moments to actually watch some footage that is provided, and it's owned by TED Talks. And I'll remind us all again that that video is owned by TED Talks, and really appreciate the TED Talk format so much that they have allowed all of these um, researchers, clinicians, and folks to come and make things accessible, which has been so powerful. So before we watch the TED Talk that's been provided by Brené Brown and talks about vulnerability, I want to share that when I think about vulnerability, some of these words that come to me are volatile. So when we're vulnerable, we're volatile, right? So which makes it just hard to do because we like to have routines, we like habits, we don't like to feel like we're out of control, and being vulnerable is volatile to its core. Like it shakes you. And that's what grief and loss does, right? Grief and loss issues. And actually this morning, I kid you not, when this Brene Brown's, I think this morning or yesterday, I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but came on the Today Show and is highlighting, talking about grief and loss. And she addresses there is no time limit because people keep asking, like, how when am I going to feel better? How long is it going to take? And she's addressing this idea that there is not a time definition. You know, like I told you in one of my episodes, I was giving myself a year to figure out what was happening with me when my mom passed. There's no definition, right? But we've been constrained to this 1 year grief recovery and you'll move on and feel better. And I can tell you almost 3 years in August, there are days this whole week I was a mess. I was literally having moments of thinking about her, and it's like these waves. It's totally normal. I have accepted the fact that it's going to be normal to miss someone that you deeply care for. And that is part of that grief and loss cycle. And that is not time sensitive. So it's volatile. It's volatile to be vulnerable. And I'm sure you can imagine that I did not want to be crying in my car just thinking about having memories while I'm driving down, getting ready to go into a meeting. Was I vulnerable at that point? Yes. Was I volatile because I literally was having these tears coming down while I was pulling into the parking lot to go upstairs for this like 10 full person meeting. But I acknowledged my feelings and I was so grateful I had that in the moment of just thinking about her and our relationship. So yeah, was it a volatile moment? For sure. I felt like up, right? And then I was getting ready to go up to that meeting and I was fine. But that volatility of being vulnerable with our feelings. Understanding. The only way that I have decided we can understand ourselves truly is, I'm using the word mindfulness, and also understanding ourselves to our core when we are vulnerable. And I want to share with you, I just got this recently. I have. This is called a feeling pillow. And literally, we have all of these different feelings. Sometimes we just stay in this zone of only knowing few words. I mean, this isn't even a full extensive one, but there's all of these words that we can feel and are supposed to feel and become vulnerable with. And so I talk about the idea behind, if we're going to be vulnerable, then we need to understand that. And I've said this before many a times. We are going to feel jealous. We are going to feel angry. We are going to feel hurt, hateful, and hurtful, and all of that. You know, a few months ago, I told my girls I didn't want them to use the word hate. And so I went back and I was like, wait a minute, slow it down. If they actually don't like something and they actually hate it, why am I bashing that and I'm making it about myself? Am I that uncomfortable with somebody expressing their hate? I mean, my children expressing their hate? So I went to them and I said to them, I'm so sorry that I said that. It's okay. It's okay to use hate if you think that's that feeling. So, granted, then they started using it again with permission. And as a parent, those of you who are parents or even have exposure to children, please let them feel all the feels. Feel all the feels. We have to start doing it. They have to do it. And then we always talk about how we have the reaction is that is where we have to get things under control. But I guarantee you, the more we feel all the feels, it will reduce, it literally will transform the amount of violence we have, the amount of wars we have. And I'm going to tell you again with the practices of mindfulness, they're showing how these nonviolent movements happened. When we think about these civil rights movements that occurred in the 60s, what was happening around this time? They had practices. They really did. And one of them was also making these shifts in how we address what we are feeling in that core. I also talk about vulnerability is never ending. It truly is. I thought for a while in my own vulnerability of that like ups and downs, and I use my most recent experience with grief and loss. I'm like, oh my God, is this done yet? And then I'm like, okay, 2 years later, no, I'm done with just having feels of being overwhelmed. And sometimes I feel guilty now being like I was saying, example of like sometimes I get upset and frustrated about my own schedule, and it's so small because I'm so blessed, right? So I'm still giving myself permission to have feel all the feels, because you can still be grateful and still feel all the feels. So we need to really acknowledge that piece, right? Gratitude overall, meaning that happiness of what you have and being grateful, but also acknowledging what you're feeling, especially in that moment. And then when we're vulnerable, we may not like what we see, right? It brings up stuff, and that's what makes it hard too. We can often have some demons we've covered up, or we may have parts of ourselves that we don't like. And that's hard work. It's hard work to face any of it. But then it's also really powerful and transformational. And then, where that comes. And with vulnerability comes energy. Energy meaning it is work. But most people aren't afraid of doing actual work, right? In terms of like, when we go to work, we're not afraid to do it. We know we have to do it. We hide from our emotions because we think we don't need to. Yet we're realizing they will, and they have, and they do creep up big time. And then they become magnanimous, right? They become larger than we can control. Whether that be having an outburst, lashing out at somebody, right? Or being so overwhelmed. So just want to acknowledge the fact of what vulnerability means. It's hard, but it is the critical piece. And I just wanted to acknowledge this before we start. When I was having these thoughts today about what we're going to discuss, and vulnerability and the mind, right? Dealing with our emotions, they're all related, and to help hold that space for us is so critical. So, want to quickly remind you again that the video footage we are watching is owned by TED Talks, and I want you, when you are watching this video, to look through the lens of what are her words saying? What is she saying? How is she talking about? How is Brené Brown talking about vulnerability? What does it mean, and how does it manifest itself? So we'll watch a small portion of it, and then of course you all can check it out on your own time as well, so that you can um, navigate it and see what it looks like to sit with vulnerability, to stand with vulnerability. All right, thank you all for your patience, and the link for the video is going to be in the comments so that you have it. And yeah, I'm really excited about us taking a few minutes to explore this concept. All right, we are all ready to go, Roxy.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event. And she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet talking me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was getting my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's why we're here. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome and one thing that you can't, an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you their most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling, I'm not blank enough, I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in, I'm gonna figure this stuff out, I'm gonna spend a year, I'm gonna totally deconstruct shame, I'm gonna understand how vulnerability works, and I'm gonna outsmart it. So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not gonna turn out well. You know this. So I could tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data, and 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book, I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but that's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie, and I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder, and I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability. and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to a little breakdown, which actually looked more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown, my therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody. Do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends are like, woo, I wouldn't want to be your therapist. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, I'm just saying, like, don't bring your measuring stick. It's like, okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down, and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And I think I have a problem, and I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no childhood shit. I just need some strategies. Thank you. So she goes like this. And then I said, it's bad, right? And she said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is gonna suck. And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest. Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability.
All right. Thank you all for letting us engage in that clip. And thank you for TED Talks for putting out such great content to be able to watch. And you can watch the rest of it. Really, really important. If you just notice, we dabbled our feet in it, and that's exactly what we want to have happen. I do want to share with you. So Brené Brown's latest book is called The Atlas of the Heart, and it's called Mapping Human Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience. And so I just wanted to share, while kind of navigating the video, I was also navigating a few pages, and she relates in her research that about 87 emotions or experiences have kind of been linked at this point when we kind of highlight. And so when I look at this, I'm just so excited about this pillow, you all. But look, this doesn't even frame all the 87, but if you notice in the middle center of like our mad, sad, peaceful, powerful, joyful, scared, and there are many different emotion wheels that have been designed. But this one kind of spoke to me a little bit more. But when you look, so here we are, right? Here we are at that, finally identifying what the fact that